Welcome back to another episode of Time Out with the Sports Doctor podcast, where life, sports, and medicine intersects. We are glad that you are part of this growing community where we strive to help you strengthen your mindset, help you grow your assets, and help you achieve whatever level of success that you want for your life. Go to our website at Dr.Derrick, thesportsdoctor.com, where you can find all the latest content, and you can also follow us on our social media channels. Now, let's get into this episode. All right, so welcome back to another episode of Time Out with the Sports Doctor, and we're going to do a book review today. And if I'm being completely honest, I've been sitting on this episode for about 2 months now, really pondering it. I went through the book once. I went through the book a second time, and I knew that this was a message that I needed to share with everyone, but I've struggled to sit down and record it, if I'm just being completely transparent about it. And this won't necessarily be a fun episode for people because it requires self-reflection, introspection, which usually is not fun, right? So the book that we're going to be reviewing is called The High Five Habit by Mel Robbins. Take control of your life with one simple habit. So I want you to keep an open mind, number one, because I don't want you to get caught up in certain things and miss the big picture. And the big picture is really self-validation and the negative self-talk that we often do, or that I often do with myself, and that people often do with themselves, where we are able to cheer on everyone else around us, but we really struggle with seeing our own self-value. And if we especially struggle with giving our own selves a pat on the back or giving our own selves a high five. So for anybody who watches sports, the high five is probably the most performed celebration act in sports. Now, if you watch modern sports, there are a lot of different celebrations. So the gritty is probably the most commonly performed celebration in 2024. But just historically speaking, high fives, you still see a lot of high fives. In the starting lineup, people high five each other. At the end of the game, people high five each other. When you make a great play, the coach will give you a high five, or you'll see teammates giving a high five, because a high five is a shared celebration amongst people where you're pretty much giving validation to the other person. It's a shared celebration where you're exchanging energy. You're touching each other. You're giving an outright, an outward showing of support for that other person. But what would it mean to high five yourself? So the high fiving part is the actual physical action that she speaks about in this book, and talking about doing it in the mirror. So I know some people, first thing you think about is, I'm not touching my mirror because it's going to leave a fingerprint, but that's not the important piece, right? So even if you cannot physically bring yourself to touch your window or to touch your mirror because it's going to leave a fingerprint, I still want you to hear the story behind why high-fiving yourself is important. And I think partly the reason why I've been sitting on this for so long is because this is dense. It's a lot of information. Even as I went back through my notes trying to summarize it, it's still a lot of information. So likely we'll break this up into 2 segments just because it's a lot to digest. And I want to make sure that you're taking your time as you go through it. And if at any time you feel like I'm finger pointing or blaming you, just remember I'm talking to myself, because this is really more of a personal thing than it is anything else. So let's just get started. So what are the 5 things that a high five do to you? Or what are the 5 things a high five says to yourself? Number 1, it shows you confidence. It shows celebration. It shows validation. It shows optimism and action. So as I mentioned before, a high five, when you're doing it with somebody else, it's a transfer of power between 2 people. And when you do it with yourself, you're telling yourself, I believe you and I see you. All right. So how often do you cheer for yourself? Even when you know that you're doing a great job, even when you know that, you might be the top of your game in whatever you're doing, are you comfortable enough to say, Derrick, you're doing a great job. Derrick, keep doing what you're doing. You're making an impact on people. Just to be completely honest, with the podcast, I still struggle from time to time as to why am I still doing this, and I'll have people on a weekly basis, monthly basis say, I heard this episode, it really helped me. But in my mind, I'll still say, does this really matter? Has your time for doing this passed? Has the impact that you made on this podcast, does it really matter? Are people's lives being changed by what you're doing? So when you high five yourself, you're really validating yourself, saying that I see you, you matter, you are important. So high five is a shared celebration. It's more effective than just verbal praise. Your mind believes it more than words because it requires action. So there's a lot of science to show that even taking notes, because it's an action step, is more effective than just listening, or that, actually putting things to action help you remember them, or because more neural pathways are being created when action is involved. And we're not going to get really deep into science because I don't want to lose some people in that. But combining thoughts and words with action can have a greater effect. So 3 things every human needs: to be seen, heard, and appreciated. Every human needs to be seen, heard, and appreciated. And many times we're looking for the world, or we're looking for outside validation. And we need to start off with the high fiving yourself tells yourself that you are seen, you are heard, and you are important, and you are appreciated. So that's some of the self-talk, more positive self-talk to yourself than when you look in the mirror. Typically, what happens first? Your eyes, I'll say my eyes will zoom in on whatever I think is wrong. Like, man, you got some dark circles under your eyes. Man, you look tired. And then start to think about, the longer you sit there, all the different things that you could be doing or need to be doing, or how many things you have going on this week, or how many tasks you have to complete this day, and games to go to and things of that nature, versus looking yourself in that mirror and saying, you are important, you are strong, you are brave. Whatever today has in your way, you will be able to overcome it. So taking those few seconds to really start your day with affirmations, your self mantra, whatever it is. We have done affirmations in our house for a while now, not as frequently as we used to, but still believe in the power of affirmations and self-talk. One of my favorites is, I give up being perfect to be authentic, because I know sometimes, as trying to please other people, which we will talk on later, you will really compromise who you are as a person. As healthcare providers, we spend a large portion of our lives focused on our training as well as taking care of other individuals. But I'm calling a timeout, because life can change in an instant. We know it's difficult to fathom that a sudden illness, injury, or death could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But that's where Dr. Stephanie Pearson and her unique team of advisors at Pearson Ravitz come into play. They focus on empowering physicians like yourself to protect your most valuable asset, your income, and life's most important people, your family. So go to pearsonravitz.com to make sure that you are protected today. So one study was done by Google, a large study in 2012. You can look it up, Project Aristotle, where executives were trying to figure out what makes teams at work most effective. So they did a large study where they were trying to pair up different personalities, different attitudes, putting strong employees with weaker employees to try to see what builds a more effective team. And what some of the data showed was that it indicated that psychological safety, more than anything else, was critical to making a team work. So psychological safety. And happiness at work was determined by a boss that cared for them, not necessarily by the smartest team or higher salary. We're always at work, executives are trying to figure out what will make employees happy, what are employees really looking for. And this study showed that they were really looking for validation and knowing that they were working in a place where their boss truly cared for them. So sure, getting a raise will help, having more time off would help, having a longer lunch break, whatever would help. but being able to work in a supportive environment is what they showed was most important. So on chapter 3, a high five provides internal validation. So I want to sit with this for a minute because as a person, we need validation. And many times we're looking for other people when we do something to say, wow, you did a good job. Or even on the podcast, wow, that was a good episode, versus internal validation. And internal validation is you knowing that you are important, you knowing that I've given my best. So whatever the results are is fine. You know, I've overcome a lot of things in my life. So where I am, I'm right where I need to be. And it's okay that I might not be doing as well as the next person, but I'm fine. You know, so many times I feel that people struggle in different tasks because we're always waiting for somebody else to high five us or always waiting on somebody else to pat us on the back and tell us that we're doing well versus knowing and truly believing in ourselves and giving ourselves the validation that we're looking for in the world. So, this is another quote from the book. When you think you're messed up, you will hate yourself. And when you hate yourself, you'll do the things you hate. So, when you think you're messed up, you will hate yourself. And when you hate yourself, you'll do the things that you hate. So, just unpacking that, trying to break bad behaviors or trying to break habits, trying to sometimes redirect your lives when you know that you don't like what you're doing, but you might feel powerless to what you are doing. And then when you do the things that you don't want to do, right, you are going to be upset with yourself or maybe even hate yourself. And this is telling us that the more we hate ourselves or the more we form negative self talk or the more we degrade ourselves, the more likely we are to continue to do that thing that we don't like, to continue that negative cycle in our lives. So, self validation, positive self talk is definitely going to be more constructive than the destruction that we do when we're doing negative self talk towards ourselves. So, flipping limiting beliefs. So, once again, you can look up the reticular activating system, but we're not going to get really deep into science. But this is kind of the unconscious side of the brain, referred to it as the bouncer of the brain that filters the majority of the topics from your conscious mind. Many thoughts will just kind of be there and then disappear. And the reticular activating system is part of that side of the brain that will filter out a lot of things. However, negative thoughts seem to creep through more than anything else, right? And those thoughts are things that you can tend to ponder on more. So the 5 second rule is one thing that she talked about in this book. Don't allow yourself more than 5 seconds to ponder on bad thoughts. And when those bad thoughts come up, try to redirect your mind. So when you believe your life is a disaster, you will focus on the wrong things. Forgive yourself and become a better version of yourself. Let yourself out of the mental jail. Has anybody else ever been in a mental jail with your negative self thoughts? Let yourself out of the mental jail. I thought that was very impactful. And then just use reverse psychology when you have those negative thoughts. Messing up or failing is preparing me for something great. Just because you make a mistake, you are not that mistake. And know that you can use each and every failure as a stepping stone towards achieving that level of success that you want. So pondering on bad thoughts, I know that's something that I'm guilty of and that I struggle with. So that section really spoke to me. So chapter 7, bad things can happen to you, but you choose to attach bad thoughts to it. Train your mind to start seeing opportunities. And they talked about the finding hearts exercise, training your mind to see what you wanted to see. For instance, when you buy a new car, you might have never seen a Tesla on the road. And now that you have started driving a Tesla or interested in buying a Tesla, you start to see Teslas everywhere. So train your mind to see what you want to see, to start seeing new opportunities instead of seeing failures. One thing I always talk about for myself is when I encounter bad situations or encounter problems, instead of trying to dwell on the problem, I'm starting to look for opportunities or start to look for answers. Because many times when you see a problem or you feel stuck, that can make you anxious. It can make it harder for your, mind to find a way out. But when you start seeing opportunities, entrepreneurship, making new products, creating, because many people might be going through that same difficulty that you are, finding a solution to it instead of dwelling on the issue. I think it's very important.
Thank you for continuing to support this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a 5-star review. And if you haven't done so, subscribe so you continue to get the updated episodes. Until later, peace.
Hey, time out with the sports doctor. Keep our head right in the game. We ain't never stopping. You are now tuned in. Trust you don't want to miss. This is where life, sports, and medicine